Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, as many of you know, one of the reasons I record this podcast is because in a world of bad news and worst case scenarios being reported as fact, I want to try and give you all a beautiful distraction and offer a more positive narrative that will make you feel better about the future and the role that you can play and how technology can help deliver that and much more. And I am conscious that there are people feeling a lot of anxiety at the moment with so many jobs at threat, and there are many articles being published about people being replaced by machines. But I want to explore how leaders and employees can work collaboratively to downplay that fear, because ultimately, real success is delivered by humans and robots working together. They should be complementing each other, offering businesses the best of both worlds rather than competing. I think we're retiring that mindset now. So I've invited Beena Ammanath, the Executive Director of Deloitte AI Institute, and she is an award-winning senior executive with extensive global experience in artificial intelligence and digital transformation. And one of the reasons I'm excited to get her on the podcast today is her knowledge spans across e-commerce, financial, marketing, telecom, retail, software products, services, and industrial domains with companies such as Thomson Reuters, British Telecom, Bank of America, and a number of Silicon Valley startups. So today, I want to talk about thriving in the era of pervasive AI and explore insights from Deloitte's State of AI in the Enterprise, the third edition. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to the US, where Beena is waiting to speak with us right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yes, hi Neil. Happy to be on the show and really looking forward to a conversation today. I am a trained computer scientist and have been in the space of data and seen its whole evolution right from the transactional systems to data warehouses and BI, and now machine learning, big data, and AI. So have always anchored my career in AI and have worked across different industries and verticals, right from the IoT to financial companies to trading companies to manufacturing and telecom. So every time I got curious about a new industry, I would look for that new opportunity, but always anchoring myself on data, right? And I have been at Deloitte for the past 2 years, and I think that maybe I should have just been here because it gives me exposure to all the industries in one place. So at Deloitte, I do a couple of things, and one is leading our Deloitte AI Institute, which is really a need I had when I was in the industry on the other side, really being able to plug into the AI ecosystem, right? Because the AI ecosystem is vast, massive, and you need to get to a solution faster. You need to know what startups are doing, what kind of research is happening, what are the mature AI products, what are the policies and regulations that's happening around this. So there is so much happening in the AI ecosystem, and that's what we try to bring together under the Deloitte AI Institute, is very much from an applied AI for the enterprise lens, so that you can get to solutions faster. I also lead our AI ethics, trustworthy AI, thought leadership, and an offering around it to really help clients navigate around this fuzzy, complex topic of ethics and how do you actually operationalize it in large enterprises. So that's me.
Excellent. And I'm so excited to get you on the podcast today as well, because it does feel like we're entering this new chapter in the adoption of the current generation of AI technologies, and capabilities seem to be advancing at breakneck speed. And after reading the After seeing that Deloitte released the third State of the AI in the Enterprise report, I felt compelled to invite you on the podcast to learn a little bit more about that. So for anyone listening that have not seen the report, can you tell me more about the history behind it and who you surveyed?
Yes, absolutely. I am pretty excited about it, and we surveyed almost 3,000 IT and executives from around the world. In total, 9 countries were represented. It's a global survey, and the idea was, how do we get a pulse on everything that's happening with AI? And we focused really on the evolution of AI adoption across industries and countries. This is a third edition. So in prior editions, we've actually looked at the bullish attitude of AI adopters and their increasing investments and deployments. And what we concluded was that companies have to balance their excitement with a strong ability to execute. We also suggested that companies improve their risk and change management approach and really look at applying AI outside of the IT function. That's how you reach the true potential of AI, right? So, and then from a talent perspective, finding that right blend of technical and business talent, which can help accelerate the AI efforts, both from a creation and adoption perspective. So, if I can go into, throw out some interesting numbers that showed up. So 71% of the adopters expected to increase their investment in the next fiscal year. And 74% of them said AI will be integrated into all enterprise applications within 3 years. And 61% say AI will substantially transform their industry in the next 3 years. So very bullish, right? That's the pulse that we've seen on AI across enterprises in the world.
Love that. And I also read that 47% of all adopters say that they have a high level of skill around selecting AI technologies and technology suppliers. Can you expand on that? Did that figure surprise you?
Yes, it did actually. So AI adopters view being a smart consumer as critical to boosting competitive advantage. So when we asked them to select their top initiative for increasing their competitive advantage from AI, they picked modernizing our data infrastructure for AI as their top choice, closely followed by gaining access to the newest and best AI technologies. So what that tells you is that data continues to be a challenge. Data is an integral part of AI, and there is a lot of energy and thought being put into it. It is a top priority, but also closely on how do you keep a pulse on what's happening in the AI space, right? So the importance of a robust data infrastructure, that is unsurprising as it is a foundational. But, knowing that, our AI adopters are really curious about the newest and best technologies, that is equally important.
And also in the report, it said that less than half, 45%, said that they have a high level of skill around AI, integrating AI technology into their existing IT environment. So I'm curious, how are you seeing businesses addressing that challenge? Because it's quite significant, isn't it?
Yeah, and when we say AI technology, it includes data science and machine learning platforms, enterprise applications powered by AI, tools for developing those conversational interfaces, and also low-code, no-code tools, right? That's the premise around which it was based. So across all these different technology areas, 93% are using cloud-based AI capabilities, and 78% actually use open source AI capabilities. So, for example, an online marketplace has shifted its AI experimentation to a cloud provider to dramatically increase its computing power and number of experiments. Learning how to manage and integrate these disparate tools and techniques is actually fundamental for success, and they know it, right? For some, this also means making improvements as needed to existing legacy IT infrastructure to support the new AI solutions. And CTOs and CIOs are working closely together on bringing that organization's technology capabilities and choose the AI solutions that work for them and their environment.
And I'm curious, do you think that more successful businesses will be the ones that use AI to enable humans and machines to complement each other rather than compete against them? Because we have seen in the past or businesses that leverage technology to replace people, but I think it seems like we've learned from that now, and it's all about you get the most by complementing each other and working together. That's where the magic happens. But I'm curious, what have you seen there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are big believers in it's the best path to success with AI is when you do humans with machines, right? It has to be about human collaboration with the machines we invent. So AI in the workplace has the potential to make jobs more interesting for human workers by augmenting their tasks and freeing them to perform higher level functions and make better informed decisions. Literally, we are at that stage in life. The best way to think about it is if it takes 30 seconds of your brain power to do an activity, it is probably something that will get automated in the next few months or years, right? So AI actually sparks new ways of working that blend the best of what machines do with what humans bring to this collaboration, which is really the creativity, experience, judgment, empathy. And in fact, 78% of the executives surveyed for Deloitte State of AI in the enterprise believe that AI-based augmentation of workers will fuel new ways of working. So, I think we are seeing that happening in the market, where it is you get the most impact by bringing humans and machines together.
And 95% of adopters also express concerns about ethical risks for the AI initiatives, and that is a hot topic as well right now. So how are the adopters that you've seen tackling those risks head on? Because it is a fascinating space to be in right now, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's one of those fuzzy areas, right?
Yeah.
The critical issues that arise from AI are complex and multidimensional, right? They require expertise, which is not just about technology. You need, trained ethicists. You need, it needs to cut across really philosophy, psychology, sociology, and everything in between, and then tie in regulatory compliance and policies. So I think it's a very hard problem to solve, but I think we are making progress in this. And it's really about taking that team approach to AI ethics, because when we start looking for this unicorn person with all these talents, it just doesn't work, right? So how do you bring in this multidisciplinary team together to figure out, what are the ethical impacts? One thing I'll add, Neil, is that, the best way to frame this is really, if you look at what's happening in the AI space, there are three parallel streams, right? One is the core technology of AI that is still evolving, right? Whether it's quantum or deep learning, the next wave of machine learning models. And then there is the applications of the technology, which is used across different industries and functions, right? While the core technology is still evolving. And we are applying it in real life, in real world scenarios. And then the third one is really the consequences of applying it, because there is no one playbook. Everything is not figured out, because each one of these is growing. And from a consequences, that's where I put things like ethics, policy, regulation, the risks associated with it. So what we're seeing more and more companies, really being hyper aware, which honestly wasn't the case even 2-3 years ago, right? Hyper aware, and then defining their ethics principle. Deloitte certainly has a Trustworthy AI framework, which gives a structure to think about ethics, and we are seeing a lot of demand for it. And it gives a structure to help come up with the principles. And then you need to think about how do you make sure everybody in the organization understands what ethics mean. And then there are, the governance and controls and put in place so that you can actually mitigate these risks, not only during, the design and development, but once it's in production and through, embedding ethics as part of MLOps.
And there are so many great insights in the report. And I'm curious, as someone that gets to see a lot of these, did anything in that report surprise you at all?
I think, I would say surprised and happy to see that, ethics is on top of mind, right? And it is actually broadened the conversation beyond, like even 3 years ago, I think if you brought up ethics, the conversation would be mostly about fairness and bias. Now, those are important implications, but I think the conversation around ethics has to be a little bit more nuanced for us to make progress, and that's happening. We've seen that the rapid deployment of AI over the past year has brought more public and regulatory attention on AI's influence, and that's kind of driving this conversation. But it also makes me very hopeful that we can get to that solution faster, right? Before we used to focus just on what value can AI create. Now the conversation also expands to, okay, what would happen if this goes wrong, and how do we ensure we put the guardrails? So I think what surprised and made me happy was really the focus on ethics coming up earlier in the discussion with AI.
And something else outside of the report that I felt I must bring up today was about your work at the AI Institute. So can you expand on that and the work that you do?
Yes, so the Deloitte AI Institute is set up to bring together, visionaries in the space, industry experts, connections into the academia and research, to startups and mature AI products, to really look at how AI is being applied across industries and sectors, and whether it is identifying use cases, understanding industry-specific ecosystems, or how do you scale from AI proof of concepts and best practices around it, securing the AI systems. So the Institute really brings that collective view on how to solve for AI, find the right AI solution for large enterprises. And I'll give you an example. The best way to think about it, it actually came from a pain point that I had, before I joined Deloitte, and I've seen several of my peers facing with it as well. Is, as a business executive, you kind of know what the business problem is that you want to try to solve. Right? Say, for example, I want to solve for predicting when a jet engine might fail, so that there is no unplanned downtime, right? What I don't know is, how do I get to the solution in the fastest possible way? Is there a mature AI product that I can buy off the shelf, train it on my jet engine data, and deploy it? If not, is there a startup working on this that I could potentially acquire or influence so that they can build that product faster? If not, is there academic research happening in this space so that I can, partner that PhD student or researcher? Right. The goal is to get to the solution fastest. And if not, then, how do I build it? Do I leverage the in-house team? Is there another company that's worked on it that I can partner with? How do you solve for this in the fastest possible way? And that's this kind of question the Deloitte AI Institute answers for large enterprises working with AI across these different dimensions, right? So bringing all those dimensions together. I also, and part of the Deloitte AI Institute is also looking at, how do we solve for the fuzzy problems around AI ethics, but how do you get more diversity and inclusion in AI? I didn't mention this in my intro, Neil, but I'm also the founder of a nonprofit called Humans for AI, which is really about increasing diversity in the workforce, really focused on getting more women and underrepresented minorities into the AI workforce. Because I think for AI to reach its full potential, we need those diverse voices.
I completely agree. I think one of the big focuses must be increasing diversity and also reducing bias from AI. And especially if companies companies need to be as diverse as their audience if they're able to serve them correctly. And as AI adoption grows, is there any advice that you'd offer to companies wanting to manage AI ethics and doing so stay ahead of the pack?
Yes, absolutely. I think the first step is to define what does AI ethics mean for you. We've seen this conversation happening at a very broad, high level till now, right? And I think we need to go to that next level down, and really, companies need to, bring in their key stakeholders and figure out what does AI ethics mean. Because the reality is, even though fairness and bias might be important to a company that's focused on consumers, right? Direct consumers may not be as relevant to, say, a jet engine manufacturer, right? If you are a manufacturing plant company, right? So it's to define those principles and then, bring in that, bring the entire workforce aligned so there is some learning and development involved. The next step is to look at the existing processes on, what are the different processes and controls that exist and how do you embed the ethics component to everything that you're doing with AI. And then the last one is really looking at, the tools that you might be using, the vendors you might be working with. Do they align with you on the ethics principles that you've defined, right? So there is a more broader, all-encompassing view to solve for it. But, becoming that smart consumer and actively addressing AI ethics is that first step.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I appreciate that we've only scratched the surface of that report, really. So for anyone listening that would like to check out the report in its entirety and maybe even connect with you or read more of your work at Deloitte, what's the best way of doing that?
The best way is to go to the Deloitte AI Institute website. There's a report there, and we have all these different, a lot of thought leadership and ideas that I just barely scratched the surface with you on the Deloitte AI Institute website. You can also find me on LinkedIn under my name, and my Twitter is @Beena_Ammanath. So I would love to connect with your listeners and continue the conversation, Neil.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. There's so much I've loved about the conversation today, especially for pointing out that in addition to the tech skills gap and training, employee anxiety about being replaced by machines and how leaders and employees can work collaboratively can downplay the fear. And the big message I got from that report is humans and robots can and should work together. And we've all seen a lot of horror stories out there and doom and gloom. And this is the narrative that we need to be promoting out there. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing that story with me today.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for having me as a guest.
I just cannot thank Beena enough for sharing the biggest skills gaps, the most in-demand technology skills, what companies are looking for, and how employees and leaders at all levels can prepare themselves for this new normal by prioritising disruptive technologies like AI. And also a big thank you to Beena for sharing her perspective on what leaders and employees can do to prepare themselves for developing AI skills needed for that post-COVID economy. But please, I invite you to share your insights, fears for the future, what excites you about the future, questions, pictures to come on the podcast if you'd like to join me and carry on this conversation we started today, or anything at all. And you can do that by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. If social media is more your thing, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, @NeilCHughes is where you'll find me. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So I invite you to share. So keep your messages coming in. I'll make you a promise. I'll return again tomorrow, same time, same place, but with another guest. And I'm going to continue to give you these beautiful distractions and provide a more positive narrative and look into the future. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.